They said the restaurant had character. Rustic charm, Ashley called it. All I saw was a cramped booth with flickering Edison bulbs and waitstaff who addressed us like buddies on a bar stool. The kind of place that charged $28 for wilted kale and poured water from mason jars. But I smiled and nodded because that's what I've learned to do. Blend into the furniture and let the younger people feel like they're running the show. It was my birthday. 69. I'd asked for something simple, a home-cooked meal, just the four of us. Daniel, Ashley, the baby if they could get a sitter. Instead, I was sandwiched between a peeling brick wall and a neon bar sign, trying not to squint under the glare of the exposed bulbs, while Ashley filmed her third Instagram story before the appetizers even arrived. To Mom, Daniel said, raising his glass once the drinks were down. For being the strongest woman I know. Ashley's phone captured the moment from across the table, her other hand already placing a gift bag in front of me. White tissue paper spilled over the top like foam on champagne. I smiled politely and opened it. A onesie. White, cotton soft, with bold black letters across the chest, future tax deduction. Ashley clapped once. Surprise, baby number 2. Just found out last week. Daniel grinned, like a boy who just won a carnival game. I blinked. Oh, that's unexpected. She reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. We were waiting for the perfect time to tell you. Figured your birthday would be the right moment. Then came the second surprise. We also wanted to share some even bigger news, Daniel said. He stood, tapping a spoon against his wine glass. The clinking rang sharp in the room, silencing nearby tables. We're moving. I looked up. Ashley pulled out her phone again and started recording. Daniel grinned wider. We're moving into Mom's apartment. I froze. He gestured toward me. She's agreed to downsize, finally, and we're taking over the space. It's such a blessing to have a home we can grow into, and it's all thanks to her generosity. The air left my lungs. Ashley turned the camera on me. Say something, Mary. I felt the table tilt. The room didn't spin, but it shifted, like the walls were suddenly farther away than they should be. I cleared my throat. I didn't know this was finalized. Daniel chuckled. Oh, don't be modest. You said you didn't need all that space anymore. Remember? I didn't remember saying that. What I remembered was an offhand comment weeks ago about how I sometimes felt a little alone rattling around in the place since Richard passed. That was all. Not an invitation. Not a green light to be evicted from my own life. Ashley launched into her vision for the nursery, gray and cream tones, gender neutral, and will leave your balcony plants, of course. They're kind of your thing. My thing. My apartment, my memories, my life. I hadn't even finished the appetizer, and they were already moving in. I left before dessert. Said I felt tired, which wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. Daniel offered to call a rideshare, but I waved him off. I needed to walk, needed the cold air to wipe the fog off my thoughts. It was 5 blocks back to the building. I counted each one like a prayer bead. By the time I reached my floor, something in my chest had gone quiet. Not calm quiet, like a held breath. Like something was waiting. Inside my apartment, everything was where I left it. The Afghan Richard's mother, crocheted, still draped across the couch. My bookshelf leaned a little to the left, just like it always had. I placed my coat on the hook, slid off my shoes, and walked to the window. Below, the city hummed. I'd lived in this building for 33 years. Raised a child, nursed a husband through chemotherapy, buried him in February. Paid off every penny of the mortgage myself. But tonight, my son stood in front of a room full of people and told them it was his now. Not asked, told. I made tea out of habit, mint and chamomile, let it steep too long. Then I opened the drawer where Richard used to keep documents, folders marked taxes, wills, insurance. The man was methodical, right down to the color-coded tabs. I flipped until I found the yellow folder I hadn't touched in months. The one marked Private M Portfolio. Inside, my fingers brushed against 10 years of quiet decisions. Stocks, dividends. A small but powerful investment account we had opened when Daniel was still in high school, meant to be rainy day money. Richard had taught me how to read quarterly reports, track market changes, diversify. It wasn't much at first, but we'd never touched it. And now it had grown. Quietly. Like me. I ran my fingers down the most recent balance sheet, 7 figures. I inhaled once, slowly. The kind of money people assume old women don't have. The kind of money my son believed didn't exist because I still wore the same shoes from 5 winters ago. Poor widow. They said it with pity, like it was a diagnosis. But they never once asked who handled the finances in the family. Never wondered why I always came home from the grocery store with both coupons and dignity intact. I stared at the paper. Then I smiled. It was small, but it was real. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the first breath of something waking up. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, though I had every right to be, but because my mind wouldn't stop pulling threads. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face at the restaurant, smiling like a man who believed he'd already won. That expression haunted me, more than the words. The certainty, the performance, the assumption that I'd just roll over. He thought he knew everything about me, that I was predictable, harmless, poor. He never once asked what I did with my evenings after Richard passed, how I'd kept our accounts balanced, our taxes pristine, and our investments alive. He thought because I cried at the funeral and clung to an old cardigan, I didn't have sharpness left. But I did. And I wasn't going to spend another birthday being used like an empty seat at their table. By morning, I had a list. First item, visit Mr. Linford. He was the broker Richard and I used for years. We hadn't spoken since before the pandemic, but his number was still in the address book by the phone. He answered. On the second ring. Mrs. Harrow, he said, voice warm, if slightly cautious, I was just thinking about you. Is that so? I asked, smiling faintly. I saw some movement on your account last week, he added quickly. Just internal reporting stuff. No action taken, of course. I'm ready to make one. I said. We set an appointment for noon. The walk to the brokerage office took longer than it used to, but I didn't mind. The air was cold, but dry. My shawl held the heat in, and my shoes, though worn, had enough give to carry me without protest. Inside, the office hadn't changed. Still smelled faintly of old leather and printer ink. A coffee machine hissed in the background as a young receptionist offered me a seat. Mr. Linford emerged from a glass door and gave me a firm handshake. I didn't expect you in person, he said. Neither did my son, I replied. We sat. He slid my file across the desk, thick with pages I'd nearly memorized by now. We talked numbers, risk, liquidity, but mostly, we talked about intent. I don't want to gamble, I told him. I want to buy. Quietly. Cleanly. I want to own something he doesn't even know he's standing on. He nodded. Real estate? Yes. One property in particular. He raised an eyebrow. Do you already know the address? I do. It took 4 days to gather the information. I didn't ask Daniel directly. Why would I? He would have lied, or worse, spun it into another video clip about family transitions. Instead, I did what I've always done. I watched. I listened. Ashley had left her laptop open while visiting for lunch that week. She had tab after tab bookmarked, real estate listings, Pinterest nursery ideas, a financial tracker app with their mortgage lender clearly displayed. One search later, I had the full picture. They were behind. Not by much. A couple missed payments. Some deferred interest. But enough that the lender had flagged them for pre-foreclosure protocol if they didn't make a lump sum payment soon. Didn't surprise me. Ashley always looked expensive. And Daniel, well, he'd always been a spender, not a planner. Richard used to say, the boy treats money like it's a soap bubble, pretty and pointless once it pops. They thought the solution was moving into my home, eliminating their rent so they could stabilize. But I had a better idea. By Friday, I was sitting across from a woman named Clarice at a quiet title company on the edge of town. I want to purchase this mortgage, I said, sliding the paperwork toward her. She looked at it, adjusted her glasses, then looked back at me. Are you aware this is an active residential mortgage? Yes. And you're prepared to pay the full outstanding balance in cash? I am. Clarice blinked. She wasn't used to people like me doing things like this. She ran a hand through her hair and nodded. We'll initiate a transfer process with the lender. Once approved, you'll effectively own the note. But you'll need to wait out the official reassignment paperwork before you can enforce any foreclosure process. I smiled. I'm not interested in foreclosure, just control. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and stared at the documents I'd signed. There was something beautifully ironic about it. The same hands that had once braided Daniel's hair, signed his school field trip slips, and comforted him through fevers, now held the note to his entire future. He thought I was a stepping stone. He had no idea I had turned into the floor beneath him. Saturday morning came with a message from Ashley. Thinking of redoing your bedroom soon. You okay with us painting it soft sage? No greeting, no explanation. Just the casual erasure of a lifetime in one sentence. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Because by then, I had already instructed Clarice to finalize the transfer through a private holding name. It wouldn't trace back to me, not until I chose to show them. I wanted to watch them scramble first. Wanted to see what people reveal when they think no one's holding the mirror. And more than that, I wanted peace. The kind I hadn't felt in years. 3 weeks after I signed the mortgage transfer, the envelope arrived. It was plain white, labeled only with a return address and a tracking number. But I knew what it was before I slid it open with the same letter opener Richard once used for bank statements. Inside, confirmation from the lender. The assignment of rights had been processed. The mortgage that Daniel and Ashley had been struggling to maintain was now, legally and entirely, mine. It felt strange to hold something so powerful in such an unremarkable envelope, like owning the ocean inside a paper cup. I placed the letter into the yellow folder with the rest and tucked it back into its drawer beneath the tea towels. The irony of its hiding place made me smile. Ashley used to laugh at my drawer dividers. "You've got folders next to your forks," she once said. "No wonder you never find anything." But I always knew exactly where everything was, especially what mattered. I didn't act right away. I waited. Watched. Ashley's social media posts remained a steady stream of curated joy. Ultrasound appointments, pink and gray mood boards, filtered videos of Daniel carrying paint cans into my apartment like he was returning home from war. The captions were always the same tone, sweet, condescending, and unspokenly possessive. Our future begins here. Grateful for the space to grow. Making it our own. My own name was never mentioned. My role forgotten. Not once did either of them ask if I wanted to come back. No invitation for tea. No updates about what they were changing, what they were boxing up. I imagined them walking through the apartment, opening drawers and closets, discovering pieces of Richard and me they couldn't begin to understand, my husband's cufflinks in the medicine cabinet, his last grocery list, still tucked into a book spine on the shelf, my winter boots lined neatly near the door. Every week that passed without a word from them was a page they tore out of my life. So I started planning my reply. The decision wasn't made out of rage. I wasn't trying to punish them, but I did believe in consequences. When you build your life on someone else's silence, you should be prepared for what happens when they decide to speak. I made a few calls, set up a meeting with a small law firm that specialized in real estate enforcement. No one flashy, just a firm with tight policies and sharp documents. The lawyer they assigned me was younger than I expected. Miss Robbins, hair in a high bun, dark blazer, and a no-nonsense tone. She didn't condescend. She didn't smile unnecessarily. When I explained the situation, she didn't blink. "You're well within your rights to serve a notice of default," she said. "The mortgage is yours. They're the tenants now. If they've failed to comply with the original payment terms, you're entitled to enforce your legal options." "Not foreclosure," I said. "Not yet. I want them to know someone's watching, that they're not invisible landlords anymore." Ms. Robbins leaned back, tapping her pen. "You want pressure without destruction." Exactly. The letter she drafted was 2 pages long, formal and direct. It outlined the missed payments, stated the reassignment of the mortgage, included no names, just the name of the private holding entity I'd used. Renlight Holdings, a name I'd chosen from a poem Richard once loved about sparrows finding their way home. The final paragraph invited the residents to reach out to the new lender to avoid further escalation. There was no threat, but it didn't need one. I hand-delivered the letter to the mailbox on a Tuesday morning. No fanfare, no return address, just the silent weight of truth, folded and waiting. 3 days later, the silence shattered. Daniel called first. His number blinked across my screen twice before going to voicemail. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear the confusion yet. I wanted him to sit with it first, let it stew in the same space where he'd once announced my erasure like it was a party toast. That evening, Ashley called. Voicemail again. But then came the text. Mom, did you change something about the mortgage? We just got a weird letter from a lender. Can you call us? The gall of it. To ask for help. After discarding me, like yard waste. I stared at the message for a long time, then powered off my phone. That night, I sat by the window, with the city lights flickering in the distance. A fresh rain had slicked the streets, and car headlights reflected off the pavement in long silver ribbons. I sipped my tea slowly, thinking of the long years I had spent putting others first, swallowing my voice, shrinking my desires. Widow. Poor. Disposable. They had said those words in their actions, if not always aloud. But I was done being quiet. The next morning, I walked the few blocks to my bank and requested a statement update on the holding account. The teller, a young woman with short hair and a faint floral perfume, handed it over without comment. As I glanced through the balances and interest notes, a thought occurred to me, not about revenge, not about shame, but about legacy. What do I leave behind when the story others tell about me no longer matches the truth? I didn't want to be remembered as the woman who folded laundry and said thank you for scraps. I wanted to be remembered as someone who listened, who learned, and who eventually stood up. Even if it took her 70 years. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Ashley rang my doorbell. I hadn't expected her to come herself. I figured Daniel would be the one to show up first, pacing, dramatic, wounded in all the ways that made him feel righteous. But instead, there she stood, her coat pristine, lips pursed, nails painted the same dusty rose she always wore. She clutched a pale pink folder tight to her chest, like it might protect her. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. Hi, Mary, she said, voice soft, but rehearsed. She didn't call me Mom. Not today. I thought we could talk, she added. I brought some documents, just to clarify a few things. She glanced behind me into the apartment, scanning shelves and corners like she was measuring the square footage of my grief. Daniel's at work, she added. But we wanted to get ahead of any misunderstandings. I let her in. Not out of hospitality, but to control the setting. I didn't want her telling a story later about how I'd slammed the door or yelled through the peephole. If we were going to play this out, I wanted the board visible, the pieces upright. We sat at the dining table, the one Richard and I had bought secondhand 30 years ago and refinished together over a long winter weekend. She avoided eye contact as she opened the folder, laying out payment histories, lender correspondence, highlighted printouts. Her fingers moved fast, practiced in creating narratives with paper. We've been in touch with the lender, she said, but then we got the letter from this Renlight Holdings. And to be honest, it confused us. Confusion happens when you stop reading fine print, I said gently. Ashley flinched. Just slightly. We didn't know the mortgage was transferred. That's not something we were told about. No, I imagine you weren't, I said, taking a sip of tea. She looked up then. Did you do this? I tilted my head. Why does it matter? She blinked. Because it feels personal. It is. She sat back, slowly. The performance cracked. Her shoulders fell an inch. I thought we were family, she whispered. That nearly made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was hollow. A woman who filmed my supposed agreement at a dinner party now wanted to appeal to bonds she'd never tried to build. You said I could still keep my balcony plants, I said, as though I were a guest. Ashley's face tightened. That's not how I meant it. It's how you lived it. We sat in silence, the tension thick and quiet. Finally, she pushed the folder toward me. There's still time to undo this. We can call the lender, file for a reverse assignment. You have the leverage. I'm asking you to let us fix it privately. No lawyers? No lawsuits. And what do I get in return? Her eyes flicked away. Your home. The one we were going to use. There it was. Not apology. Not humility. Just transaction. I pushed the folder back toward her. I already have a home, I said. But it's just you, she replied, softly. You're alone. We're building something. A future. You're holding us hostage for a mistake in tone. My tea had gone cold. I rose from the table and walked to the window, letting her words fall behind me. Outside, the wind shook a few brittle leaves from the tree across the street. A child tugged at her father's hand at the corner, pointing toward a passing dog. I waited until my voice was steady. "You're mistaking tone for erasure," I said. "You're mistaking silence for consent." Ashley said nothing. "You moved into my space without asking. Announced it to friends before you told me. You filmed me for an audience and turned my name into a subplot. That wasn't the intention." "Then you've never paid attention to how actions shape meaning." She crossed her arms, defensive now. "We're not villains, Mary. We're trying to build a family. Then learn what one actually means." She stood quickly, gathered her folder, and walked toward the door. Before opening it, she paused and looked back. "This doesn't feel like justice," she said. "It feels like punishment." I nodded. "Sometimes the truth feels like cruelty when you've only known comfort." Then she left. That evening, Daniel called. I didn't answer. His message was short. "I don't know what she said, but we need to talk, please." I deleted it without listening twice. The next morning, a notice from the city arrived at their address, now legally under my holding name. "Routine maintenance concern. Roof permits overdue." Ashley posted about it that afternoon, vaguely blaming absentee property owners for not caring about the stability of the structure. It made me laugh. The woman who painted over my walls and boxed up my history now demanded preservation. I watched quietly. Let the rot surface. By the end of the week, Clarice, from the title office, sent me the final recording notice. The mortgage was not only transferred, it was paid in full. I'd cleared the balance quietly. The bank was no longer owed. The deed was unencumbered. I could do whatever I wanted now. Sell, transfer, gift, erase. But I didn't. Not yet, because there was something more satisfying in the waiting, in watching people rewrite history in real time, hoping the camera angles spared them. I wasn't their villain, but I was no longer their illusion. It took another week before Daniel came in person. He didn't announce it. No call ahead. No request. Just a knock on my door on a Sunday morning, as if it were still normal between us. As if we were still the kind of family that shared coffee and crossword puzzles. I was already dressed, though I hadn't planned to leave. I answered the door slowly, not with hesitation, but with the weight of knowing the moment was coming. He stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes lowered like a schoolboy sent to apologize for breaking a window. His hair was slightly unkempt, and for once he didn't lead with a smile. "Hi, Mom." His voice had a dullness to it, tired. Maybe. Or maybe something finally cracked beneath the performance. "I was in the neighborhood," he added, glancing down at his shoes. I stepped back just enough to let him enter. We didn't sit in the kitchen. I led him to the front room, where the light was softer and where the couch still held a faint indent from the last time Richard napped there with a newspaper over his chest. Daniel stayed standing for a few moments, as if unsure of where he was allowed to rest. "Tea?" I asked. He nodded. I made it quietly, no words between us. Just the familiar hiss of the kettle and the subtle clink of spoons against porcelain. When I handed him his cup, he held it with both hands, not drinking, just absorbing the warmth, like someone newly aware of what it meant to receive something without deserving it. He spoke first. "Ashley told me what happened," he said, "about Renlight, about the letter." I nodded. "And," he sighed, "I didn't know you had the kind of money to do that." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't know a lot of things." He flinched, but didn't argue. "She made it sound like you were being vindictive," he said. "But I told her, no, this is Mom, she doesn't lash out. That's not who you are." His voice cracked on the last word. Whether from guilt or calculation, I didn't yet know. I let the silence fill the room. Then I said, "Do you remember the night I drove 3 hours to bring you your birth certificate because you forgot it before your grad school interview?" He nodded slowly. "Of course I do. You were staying in that borrowed apartment. No heat. I showed up in the rain. I remember, Mom. You opened the door, took the folder and said, 'I've got it now.' And then you shut the door." Daniel looked down at his tea. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know," I said. "You meant it the way you always mean it. That once someone gives you what you need, they can leave." His eyes welled slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. "We didn't mean to take the apartment without asking." Ashley got excited. "And you didn't stop her," I finished for him. "No, you never stopped her," I added. "You let her speak for both of you. You let her frame me like I was decoration, an old armchair left behind for sentimental value. I know, he whispered. And you stood there while she painted over my walls, replaced my curtains, announced to her friends that my home was now hers. I was stupid, he said. I stared at him. You were silent. Silence and stupidity aren't the same thing. He set the cup down on the side table and rubbed his hands together. I thought we could share it. That it would help. You mean that I'd be grateful for being allowed to live in a corner of my own life? He didn't answer. I stood and walked over to the bookshelf, running my hand over the spines. So many books, so many years. I paid off your mortgage in full, I said. He looked up quickly. I know, he said. I saw the statement. You didn't have to. I did, I said firmly. Not for you, not for Ashley, for myself. To remind myself that what I've built, what your father and I built, cannot be so easily rewritten. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I turned toward him. You called me poor, he blinked. I never. Not with your mouth. With your actions, with your assumptions, with the way you left me out of every decision, as if I didn't have the means or the mind to shape my own future. He stood, suddenly, alert. Mom, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just thought we were helping each other. I thought it was kindness. That word. Kindness. I almost laughed. You know what kindness is? I asked. Kindness is giving someone the option to say no. Kindness is asking, not informing. Kindness doesn't need a camera or a caption. He looked ashamed. Do you want the house? He asked finally. I mean truly. If you want it back, I'll move. I studied him. Would you have offered that if the mortgage were still yours? I asked. He looked away. That's what I thought. There was nothing more to say. He picked up his coat slowly, like a man gathering pieces of something broken. At the door he paused. I wish Dad were here, he said. I nodded. So do I. But if he were, he'd be standing where I am. Daniel lowered his head. Then he left. That evening, I sat alone at the table with a copy of the paid deed and a cup of tea. The apartment was quiet. The city beyond it, faint with the echo of passing cars and shifting wind. I had no need to rush the next step. I didn't know yet if I'd sell the house, rent it, or let them sweat through another month of unanswered questions. But I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer their convenience, and I would never again be their silence. It rained the next morning. The kind of slow, steady rain that didn't ask permission. The kind that softened everything it touched. I stood at the window, watching the drops gather along the glass like small decisions made over time. It reminded me of my own life, how so much of it had been built on moments just like this, quiet, unnoticed, and full of weight. I didn't plan to visit the house that day. But something in me shifted as I watched the street blur through the glass. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way Daniel's words lingered in the walls. Do you want the house? If he were finally offering me something that had never stopped being mine. I took my time dressing, slipped on low, practical shoes, and pinned the emerald shawl close at the shoulder. I chose a black wool coat, the same one I wore to Richard's service. It wasn't about mourning anymore, but memory. I wanted to walk into that space, wrapped in something that had history. I left, without telling anyone. The ride across town was quiet. The cab driver didn't speak, and I was grateful for that. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries or small talk. The city passed in soft gray tones, wet sidewalks, huddled umbrellas, impatient headlights flickering in puddles. It felt like moving through a dream that remembered too much. When we pulled up to the house, I paused before getting out. The siding had been painted a pale beige since I last saw it. The lawn had been cut too short. Even the mailbox looked different, slick, modern, soulless. A house with no memory of who once built it. I paid the fare and stepped out. The walkway felt foreign beneath my feet. Ashley opened the door before I reached it. She must have seen the cab pull up. Her face was a mixture of surprise and calculation, but she schooled it quickly into something more neutral. Mary, she said, not warm, not cold. I'd like to come in. She hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon air, freshener, and something faintly floral, manufactured comfort. The walls were no longer the soft blue I'd painted with Richard on a summer afternoon, arms speckled with laughter and primer. Now they were eggshell, clean, but impersonal. There were no photos of me anywhere. Not even of Richard. Ashley stood awkwardly near the kitchen island. Daniel wasn't there. "I didn't expect you," she said. "No," I replied, glancing around the living room. "I imagine most ghosts arrive without notice." She didn't respond. I walked to the mantel. The clock was new. The books were arranged by color, not subject. Every inch of the place looked staged. "Where's the rocker?" I asked, turning back to her. "The what?" "The wooden chair that creaked. Richard used to read in it. It sat right by that window." "Oh," she said lightly. "It didn't match. We gave it away." I nodded, though my hands curled slightly at my sides. "Do you know what I did with this house?" I asked. Ashley shook her head. "I paid it off. In full. No more debt. No liens. No banks." "I know," she said carefully. "We're grateful." "Daniel said you—" "I didn't do it for you," I cut in. "I did it to remind myself what I still have power over." Her mouth closed. I looked at the staircase. "Is my bedroom still upstairs?" She hesitated. "We turned it into a nursery." "I see." I climbed the stairs anyway. The walls along the stairwell were lined with pastel illustrations of animals and clouds, sweet, soft, and entirely devoid of any trace of the family that once lived here. The door to my old bedroom was open. The crib sat where my dresser once stood. The glider chair was sleek and expensive-looking, its cushions too clean to have known a sleepless night. A shelf held children's books arranged alphabetically. On the windowsill, where I used to keep Richard's framed photo, there was now a white noise machine and a stuffed giraffe. I stood there for a long time. They hadn't just repurposed the space. They had rewritten it. I walked back down, without speaking. Ashley watched me cautiously from the kitchen. She looked nervous now, like she expected confrontation and didn't know how to win it. Instead, I sat down at the dining table. "This table," I said, tracing the grain of the wood with my finger, "was from a second-hand shop in Durham. Richard found it. He said the nicks in the legs gave it character. He fixed them anyway, just to prove he could." Ashley didn't sit. "I'm not here to fight," I said, "but I am here to remind you that this house was not built on Instagram filters and Pinterest boards." "I never said it was." "You didn't have to." She finally sat, across from me, guarded. "I'm not asking you to leave," I said. "That's not what this is." She tilted her head. "Then what is it?" "This is a reckoning." Ashley blinked. "You built a story that didn't include me. And you've been living in it like I was just an echo, like I wouldn't matter if you turned up the volume loud enough." "I didn't mean to," she said. "But you did." Her voice dropped. "Do you want the house back?" I looked around. "No," I said, "but I want you to remember whose floor you're standing on." When I left, I didn't look back. There was no need. The house might have forgotten me, but I had not forgotten it. 3 days after I visited the house, I received a package I hadn't expected. It was hand-delivered to my door, no return label, wrapped in a brown paper sleeve and sealed with clear tape. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Daniel's, still slanted and slightly too tight, the way it had been ever since middle school, when he taught himself cursive to impress a girl in the next row. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the console table near the door and walked past it twice. Once, while folding laundry, and again, while refilling the kettle. I told myself I didn't care what was inside, but the truth was, I cared too much, and I wanted to open it without my hands shaking. It was nearly dusk by the time I peeled back the paper. Inside was an old photo album, one I hadn't seen in years. The green leather binding had scuff marks at the edges and a small tear at the corner where Richard once caught it on the edge of a drawer. The cover still smelled faintly of cedar. He used to keep it in a chest in the back of the closet with other things he considered worth preserving. I opened it carefully. The first page was a photo from our first year in the house. Daniel, age 9, barefoot in the yard, holding a popsicle and grinning, his front teeth still uneven. Richard stood behind him, arm around my waist, both of us sunburned, and laughing. Page after page unfolded like a memory I'd been too busy surviving to revisit. Birthday parties with lopsided cakes. Campfires in the backyard. One Christmas photo where we were all in mismatched pajamas, Richard holding Daniel upside down by the ankles as he screamed with laughter. They'd packed this album away years ago, probably during one of Ashley's many decluttering weekends. And now it was here, returned without a note. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, the photo album open across my lap, and let the soft hum of the city fill in the quiet where my husband's voice used to be. I thought about what it meant to remember something that no one else does, to be the only living witness to a history that others have deemed irrelevant. My name wasn't on any of the baby books. I wasn't tagged in the photos they'd uploaded to their social media feeds, but I was there. Every scraped knee, every science fair, every rent check covered when Daniel was too proud to ask but too broke to hide it. I'd been invisible, in their new story, because I was inconvenient. Because I reminded them that they hadn't built anything on their own. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all, that the foundation they now stood on wasn't made of drywall and mortgages, but of years they couldn't even remember. The next morning, I made a call. Not to Daniel. Not to Ashley. To Clarice. She answered on the second ring. Renlight Holdings, she said crisply. It's time, I told her. There was a pause. Full transfer? Yes. You want the deed moved to your personal name? No, I want it gifted. I could hear her typing on the other end. Gifted with or without condition. I looked down at the album still open on the table. Without? Understood. She paused again. Are you sure? I'm not doing it for them, I said. I'm doing it for me. By noon, the paperwork was drafted. Gifting a property outright isn't as simple as handing someone a set of keys. There are forms, tax declarations, acknowledgments, but it's cleaner when you own the home free and clear, when the only debt left is emotional. I signed each document carefully, my pen gliding across the lines without hesitation. Clarice said she'd notify them by week's end. I thanked her, then ended the call. I stared at the signed documents, spread across my kitchen table, and felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. Not relief exactly, but a return to stillness. I had bought the very ground they disrespected, and now I was giving it to them. People think power is about possession, but sometimes the truest power is in letting go, and knowing they'll have to live with how they earned it. That night, I walked out onto the balcony. The air had shifted, the rain was gone, and the breeze carried the faint scent of something blooming nearby. I leaned against the railing, pulling the shawl tighter across my shoulders. Across the street, someone's window glowed with soft lamplight. A child's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere below. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not an explanation. Not my silence. Not even my forgiveness. Let them keep the house. Let them build their nursery and repaint the walls and tell stories where I never existed. They could own the property, but they would never hold the history. That belonged to me, and no title in the world could ever take that away. I mailed the letter on a Thursday. No announcement, no explanation, just a plain envelope, addressed in my neat, steady hand. Inside was a copy of the deed transfer, the formal document stating that the house was no longer part of Renlight Holdings. It now belonged, free and clear, to Daniel and Ashley Harrow. I didn't include a note. No with love, no signature beyond the one required on the paperwork. They didn't need a letter from their mother. They needed a mirror. By the following Monday, I'd received 5 missed calls and 2 voicemails. Ashley's voice in the first one was clipped, shaky, confused. We got something from a lawyer. Is this some mistake? Can you please call us? Daniel's voice, and the second was quieter, slower. I don't understand what this means. Did you sell the house? Why is your name still there in the document history? He hadn't understood the nature of the gift. He still thought power could only be taken. He didn't know yet that it could be given so cleanly it left you with nothing to argue against. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the morning reorganizing the storage closet. I found Richard's old fishing hat tucked behind a box of winter scarves. It still had a crumpled receipt in the brim from a roadside gas station on the way to Lake Morristown. He used to stop there for jerky and root beer, claimed the ritual helped summon the fish. I held the hat to my chest for a few moments, then placed it on the highest shelf. There are some things that don't need to be thrown away, just set aside, preserved, for those who still remember. Later that afternoon, I walked the florist. It wasn't a special occasion, but I felt the need to bring something living into the apartment. something that didn't ask for permission to grow. I chose a small pot of white lilies, clean, elegant, quietly resilient. The woman behind the counter wrapped them carefully, her hands practiced. She didn't ask why I chose them. That was another gift age gives you. People stop needing a reason from you. When I returned, the apartment felt different. Not quieter, but fuller, as if it had exhaled after months of holding its breath. I placed the lilies on the windowsill, where the light would catch them mid-morning. They looked beautiful there, delicate without being weak. It struck me then. This was the first time in years that my home belonged only to me, not just legally, but spiritually. No ghosts asking for more, no memories trying to pull me backward. Just space, just light, just breath. That night, Daniel showed up. He didn't call, didn't knock immediately. I saw him through the peephole, standing with his hands at his sides like he wasn't sure what part of himself to use, his voice, his fists, or his regret. I waited a moment before opening the door. His eyes were tired. Not red, not puffy, just emptied of the performance he was so good at keeping up. "I got your letter," he said. I figured. He didn't come in, just stood on the threshold. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Then don't say anything," I replied. "Just stand still." He looked down at the floor, then up again. "Why did you give it to us?" "Because it's what you thought you were owed." He flinched. "It doesn't feel like a gift." "It wasn't meant to." He nodded slowly, as if that made more sense than he wanted it to. "I wanted you to understand something," I added. "That owning something doesn't mean you've earned it. That what you inherit from people doesn't always come wrapped in a bow." He looked past me, into the apartment. "I don't deserve it," he said quietly. I stepped aside. "You're right, but that's not my burden anymore." He didn't enter. He didn't cry. He didn't kneel and thank me or defend himself. He simply stood there, bare and stunned, like a man realizing the water he thought he controlled had always been deeper than he knew. After a moment, he stepped back and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned and left. I closed the door behind him and leaned my forehead against the wood for a moment. Not out of sorrow, out of relief. Sometimes closure doesn't come with tears. Sometimes it's just the sound of a quiet latch and a world finally closing its own chapter. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the same photo album he'd returned days ago. I flipped past the early pages until I landed on one that had been taped in from a later year. Daniel in his early 20s, standing next to Richard at the hardware store, both of them laughing, covered in sawdust. There was a note scribbled in the corner in Richard's hand: "Fixing things takes time." It always had. But some things, once broken, weren't meant to be repaired, just understood. The lilies swayed slightly in the breeze that came in through the cracked window. I watched them move, soft and firm, at once, like forgiveness that didn't ask to be seen, only lived. The letter came 2 weeks later. It wasn't from Daniel. It wasn't from Ashley either. It came from their lawyer, typed on heavy paper, thick enough to feel like it had something to prove. The tone was formal, but not aggressive. Phrases like "in good faith" and "expressing gratitude" nestled beside stiffer words like "acknowledgement" and "property interest." The request, if you could call it that, was simple. They wanted to know if I would be willing to write a statement affirming that the house had been given freely, without coercion, and that no future claims would be made against it. It made me laugh, not loudly, but bitterly, soft enough that it echoed more in my chest than the room. After everything, they were still asking me to sign away something I'd already given. I placed the letter on the coffee table and left it there. That evening, I pulled out the small black notebook Richard had used to track house repairs. I hadn't opened it since he passed. The pages smelled faintly of sawdust and time. There were notes on plumbing fixes, receipts for replacement windows, sketches of shelving units he never got around to building. At the bottom of each project list, there was always one line, written in his looping, deliberate handwriting: "Don't forget, this house is hers." They didn't know that. They didn't know he'd said it aloud more times than I could count. At dinner, in front of Daniel, at the hardware store, even once when the neighbor came over asking for help moving furniture. "Mary keeps the books. She makes the payments. I just hammer nails." It wasn't modesty. It was clarity. The house had always been mine. Not because my name was on a deed, but because I never let it fall apart. Still, I understood the fear in that letter. Gifts that don't come with conditions make people nervous, especially people who've only learned love in the shape of transactions. So I wrote something, not for their lawyer, not to prove a point, but because I wanted the story recorded somewhere. It wasn't a legal affidavit, it was a letter of my own. I started it the way Richard used to begin his notes when we fought. No greeting, no formality, just the truth, told straight. You think I gave you the house because you asked for it. But I didn't. I gave it because keeping it would have kept me tied to a version of myself I no longer believe in, the one who stayed quiet to keep peace. The one who let herself be folded up like linen and placed neatly out of sight. The house meant something to me, not the walls or the paint or the mortgage. The history. You've painted over a lot. That's your right now, but there's one thing you can't cover. Who built it? Who endured in it? Who paid for it when no one was looking? You want a letter that says it's yours, that I won't come back and claim it. You don't need one. It's yours. But understand this. The title might say Harrow, but the foundation is mine. I didn't send the letter. I folded it and slipped it between the pages of Richard's repair notebook. Some things don't need to be witnessed to be real. Instead, I sent a copy of the deed again, this time signed and notarized, with a postscript scribbled in my own hand at the bottom of the envelope. You're safe. Do more than just live there. No return address. No phone call to follow. That night, I turned off my phone. I poured a glass of water, not wine. I wanted my thoughts clear. Then I sat by the window, same spot as always, and watched the wind bend the trees back into themselves. I thought about all the times I'd made myself smaller for someone else's comfort. How many times I'd let Daniel's silences become my guilt. How often I'd accepted being background noise to Ashley's performance of Family. And how none of that lived here anymore. Not in this room. Not in me. I think Richard would have been proud. Not because I outmaneuvered them, not even because I was right, but because I finally remembered that love isn't supposed to be something you survive. It's supposed to be something you choose. And sometimes, the most radical kind of love is the one that lets go, even when you know you were the only one holding on in the first place. The lilies on the sill had started to open. I leaned in to smell them, light, clean, unfussy. Just enough. The first card came on a Monday. No envelope. Just a square piece of cardstock, slipped through the mail slot, left resting gently atop the welcome mat. It was handmade, uneven edges, a thumbprint smudge in one corner. In the middle, written in thick purple marker, was one word, Hi. The back had no signature, only a small hand-drawn smiley face and a row of stick figures, 2 adults, a child, and a shorter figure off to the side, wearing glasses. I stared at it for a while, unsure what to feel. Then I set it on the counter beside my tea. 2 days later, another arrived, this time in a small envelope with a bright sticker shaped like a cat. Inside, thank you for the house. I like the window. My brother gets the top bunk. I get the bottom. We have a shelf for Legos. Still no name, just more stick drawings. But I recognized the layout of the room. My old bedroom. The third letter came with a pressed daisy tucked inside. My mom says we're lucky. But I think houses pick who lives in them. I think your house picked us. I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I felt something crack open. Not like a wound, but like the first breeze after winter. There was no return address on any of the envelopes. But the stamps were local. The handwriting young. They hadn't come from Ashley. Not Daniel, either. They'd come from someone else entirely. Someone I hadn't known existed. The next weekend, I walked to the park near the edge of their neighborhood. I didn't bring anything with me but a scarf, my glasses, and time. The air had started to shift towards spring. The trees weren't blooming yet, but the ground was softer. Children ran between benches, chasing kites that kept threatening to escape. I sat near the fountain and waited, not for anyone in particular, just for the world to show me something. And it did. A girl, no more than 7, short, dark curls, freckles, and a bright yellow raincoat even though the sky was dry. She held a notebook in one hand and a piece of sidewalk chalk in the other. She was drawing something on the pavement, a house with 4 windows and one tall woman standing outside it, with glasses and a green scarf. I tilted my head. You're good at that, I said gently. She turned, startled but not afraid. Thanks, she replied, standing. It's our house. Is that so? She nodded. It used to be someone else's, but my mom says we should take good care of it because it has good bones. I smiled. That's true. She squinted at me. You look like the lady I drew. Maybe I am. Her eyes widened. You're the window lady. I laughed softly. I suppose I am. She ran forward, holding out her notebook. I'm Ava. You can read this if you want. I wrote about the lily. I flipped through the pages, handwritten poems, drawings, some spelling mistakes that made me want to cry. One poem was titled The Quiet Lady in the Green. She didn't know my name, but somehow she had understood everything that mattered. That evening, I wrote a card. Just one. Dear Ava, the house didn't pick you. You chose it with your heart. That's the kind of choosing that lasts. I drew a small flower at the bottom, not because I was an artist, but because I wanted her to have something imperfect and real. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from Daniel. Didn't need to, because the mail began to shift. Not from lawyers, or banks, or utility statements, but from neighbors. A woman named Clarice, not my Clarice, dropped off a pie just because she used to know Richard from the co-op board. A man 2 floors down offered to fix the railing on my fire escape before spring hits. It was as if, once I stopped holding the past hostage, the future stopped seeing me as a burden. One afternoon, I cleaned the front hall closet, found a box of Richard's ties I'd forgotten about. I kept 3. One for Daniel, one for the child he used to be, and one for Ava. I folded it neatly and tucked a note inside. This belonged to the man who built the doorframe your mother stands in now. He'd have liked your poems. No address, just left it by the park bench the next time I walked through. Sometimes, the house you give away finds its own voice again, through laughter, pencil marks on the doorframe, paper flowers taped to the wall. Sometimes, when you stop trying to be remembered, someone new starts remembering you, for all the right reasons. It wasn't forgiveness that changed the way I felt about everything. It was light. The kind that slants through curtains, just right in the early morning. The kind that finds your hands when they're still, your breath when it's quiet, your name when no one's calling it. It had been 6 weeks since I gave the house away. Not much had changed outside. The streets still pulsed with city breath. Neighbors still passed without eye contact. The mail still arrived at odd hours, but inside something had shifted in me. I no longer watched the door. I had begun rearranging the apartment. Not to start over, but to start paying attention. I moved the small writing desk to face the window. Put Richard's old armchair beneath the lamp, where I read at night. I donated half my dishes, 3 coats, and the collection of souvenir magnets from places I hadn't visited in years. Not because I wanted to make space, but because I was learning what space actually was. Not absence. Breathing room. I started attending the Thursday evening poetry circle at the library. It wasn't something I'd planned. I'd seen the sign while returning a book. Poetry in the quiet hour. No experience necessary. The first time I went, I didn't say a word. Just listened. Mostly young people, a few middle-aged, one woman with a silver braid down to her waist who wrote about trains and tree roots. I didn't write at first, but I kept going. It was Ava's last card that made me try. She'd drawn a picture of a flower growing out of a boot. Underneath, in crooked, misspelled cursive, she'd written, "Things grow best in what we leave behind." I sat with that for hours. Then I picked up a pen. I didn't write about Daniel, or Ashley, or even Rich. I wrote about a house with no walls, only echoes, about a woman who took off her shoes, not to rest, but to stop waking the ghosts in the floorboards. The group listened without interrupting. When I finished, no one clapped. They just nodded. The kind of nod that says yes. We see you. That was the first time I felt truly heard in years. By April, I had started submitting small pieces to the community bulletin. Not full poems, just fragments, lines about stillness, the smell of dust after rain, the ache of being remembered by someone who never knew your name. You never ran under mine. Just a met. It was enough. One afternoon, after a reading, I stayed behind to speak with Clarice, the woman with the silver braid. She looked older up close. Not fragile, but textured. She smelled like lavender and old books. "That last line you read," she said, "about not needing to be missed, to be meaningful. That stuck with me." I smiled. It stuck with me too. She reached into her bag and handed me a folded flyer. There's a retreat in May. Nothing fancy. A weekend outside the city. Mostly older women who write and talk too much. You'd fit in. I took the flyer, already knowing I'd go. Not because I needed escape, but because I finally knew how to arrive. Later that week, I called Daniel. It wasn't a dramatic moment. I was folding linens. The phone was within reach. The silence in the apartment wasn't set. I simply picked it up and dialed. He answered quickly. Mom? Yes. A pause. Is everything okay? Yes, I said again. I just wanted to tell you, I've been writing. He didn't know what to do with that. That's great, he said. I mean, wow. I thought you should know. He exhaled. Thanks. I'm glad. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. Some bridges aren't built for return trips, but they still light the path behind you. The lilies bloomed twice that spring. Once on my sill, once in Ava's drawings, which she continued to leave, now tucked into books at the library or taped gently to the fence in the park. We didn't speak again. Not directly, but that was part of the magic. Not all family needs to be named. Some of it simply recognizes you in silence and sends flowers disguised as crayon sketches. One day, while sorting old papers, I found a blank envelope Richard had scribbled on. It had only 4 words. Keep the door open. No context, no explanation. But I taped it to the inside of my cupboard, just above the mugs. A reminder that some messages don't ask for understanding, only attention. This wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about learning to live without permission. To grow without being praised. To give without being diminished. And to be seen, finally, fully, beautifully, as the woman who had never truly disappeared. The retreat cabin was smaller than I expected. Not rustic, exactly. There was running water, fresh linens, and one of those battery-operated lanterns on every windowsill, but it felt pared down. Honest. The kind of place where nothing hid, in plain sight. Clarice greeted me at the door with her usual half-hug and a crooked smile. Her braid was tucked under a wool cap this time, but the lavender scent still clung to her scarf. Room 5, she said, handing me a key. Faces the woods. Best light in the morning. I thanked her and made my way up the narrow stairs. My overnight bag thumped against my thigh with each step, the weight of everything I wasn't carrying anymore somehow heavier than what I'd packed. The room was simple. 1 twin bed, a wooden writing desk, and a woven rug that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I opened the window first thing, letting in a rush of chilled mountain air that made my eyes water. For the next 2 days, this would be my home. Not forever, but just enough. That evening, we gathered in the common room. 7 of us in all, 5 women older than I, 1 around my age, and a quiet man named Julian, who barely spoke but took furious notes during every reading. There was no agenda, just a circle of chairs, a kettle on the stove, and a soft-spoken invitation to share what we'd brought with us. Some read from journals, others from half-finished manuscripts, or poems jotted in the margins of cookbooks. When it was my turn, I passed. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, I rose before the sun. The floor creaked under my feet as I moved about the room, careful not to wake anyone with my footsteps. I made tea in silence, then stepped out onto the wraparound porch, wrapped in my emerald shawl, watching fog drift low between the trees like breath made visible. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not an apology, not permission, not even the next step. I just stood in the cold and let the stillness speak. In the afternoon, I wrote. Not about Daniel, not about Ashley. I wrote about a house with walls that echoed and a woman who learned to stop fearing her own footsteps. I wrote about the ache of being underestimated and the quiet revolution of not correcting anyone. I wrote about lilies blooming in silence and children drawing their understanding of kindness in sidewalk chalk. That night, I read aloud. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper, but my voice did not. The room didn't shift when I spoke. No gasps, no applause. Just stillness, alive, listening, patient. When I finished, Clarice said, "Thank you for speaking." The others nodded, and I did something I hadn't done since before Richard died. I cried, not from sadness, but because I'd finally said it all, out loud. in front of people who didn't need my history to understand my truth. On the final day of the retreat, we were each invited to write something on a single stone and leave it on the trail that wound behind the cabin. Some wrote wishes, others wrote names. I wrote one word, root. Then I placed the stone beneath the base of a crooked birch tree and walked back alone, hands tucked into the folds of my shawl, heart steady. When I returned home, I didn't feel like I was returning to anything. I felt like I was continuing. There was no grand welcome, no surprise waiting in the mailbox, just a still apartment filled with everything I had chosen to keep. And that was more than enough. The first thing I did was open the windows. The second was make tea. The third was pull out the envelope that had traveled with me. Inside was the final draft of the piece I'd read aloud, now creased and marked with notes in the margins. I pinned it to the corkboard above my writing desk, right beneath the note Richard once left in the cupboard. Keep the door open. It didn't mean I had all the answers, but I was no longer asking for anyone else's. A week later, I received a letter from Daniel. Not a call, not a voicemail. A letter. His handwriting hadn't changed, but the tone had. He thanked me for what I'd given. He apologized, not for the past, but for never seeing me in the present. And he ended with a line I didn't expect. I hope one day I can raise my daughter to be half as strong as the woman I finally understand you've always been. I folded it slowly and placed it inside the same envelope that held Ava's first drawing. Some things didn't need display. They needed safekeeping. Later that evening, I went for a walk. Not far, just to the community garden down the block. The tulips were beginning to push through, not open yet, but certain. I knelt to pull a few weeds from the corner bed, then paused when I saw a child's drawing pinned to the fence post. A woman in a green shawl standing next to a tree. Underneath it was written, "She left the door open." The day I opened the last box, I didn't plan to. It had been tucked away in the back of my hallway closet, behind folded quilts and an old fan I no longer used. I'd walked past it dozens of times, pretending it was just another storage bin, not something left untouched since Richard passed. But something about that morning, maybe the softness in the air, maybe the way the light touched the floor just so, made me pause. I sat down on the rug, knees stiff but patient, and pulled the box toward me. The tape had yellowed at the corners, dust rising like breath as I peeled it away. Inside were pieces of a life that had been packed in a rush during that time when grief made everything urgent and nothing clear. A few shirts of his, worn soft at the collar, the program from his memorial service. A small wood-framed photo of us, taken at a beach I barely remembered visiting. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. My name, written in his unmistakable script. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I placed the rest of the box aside, stood slowly, and brought the envelope to the kitchen table, made tea, waited until the water boiled and settled, then sat down and turned the envelope over in my hands, like it might answer a question I hadn't yet asked. His handwriting hadn't faded. Each letter still carried his careful weight, always slanted just a little, always precise. I opened it. Inside, one sheet of lined paper, folded neatly, as if it had been waiting all this time not to be read, but to be met. Mary, if you're reading this, I probably left you too soon. I know I always said I'd outlive you out of sheer stubbornness, but if I'm not beside you now, then there's something I need you to know. You've always been more than they saw. I tried to say it when I could, but I see now it was never enough. You held things together while I held the flashlight. You made the home they all claimed. You made the silence they misread as weakness. I hope, someday, you stop waiting to be invited into a room you built. I hope you let yourself take up space. Not just in their lives, but in your own. Love them, if you can, but don't shrink for them. And if the time comes when they forget what you've given, give them something they'll remember anyway. Not out of pride, but out of power. Yours always, Ara. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. There was a stillness in me that hadn't existed before. Not emptiness, not grief, just the kind of silence that follows understanding. I folded the letter and placed it inside the black repair notebook with the others. Then I opened the windows. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store. I bought a can of paint, the color of wild sage, a new roller, and a drop cloth. When the clerk asked what room I was doing, I said, the one I kept closed too long. Back home, I cleared out the small back room, the one that had always been a catch-all, a storage space, an afterthought. It had been Daniel's room when he was a boy, later an office for Richard's part-time projects, then a guest room no one ever stayed in. Now, it would be mine. A room for writing, for reflection, for becoming. I took down the curtains, let the light pour in raw and honest. The first coat of paint went on uneven, but it was mine. The scent filled the apartment sharp and clean, like decisions finally made. I worked slowly, methodically, dipping and rolling, rinsing and wringing, watching the room transform hour by hour. With each stroke, I felt more like myself. Not the woman who left quietly. Not the woman who gave too much. But the woman who stayed. Who reclaimed. Who wrote her story into the walls. The last thing I hung was a small framed print, a watercolor of a window looking out at a garden. A gift from Clarice, tucked into my retreat bag when I'd left. On the back she had scribbled one line. May your view always reflect your worth. I placed it above the desk, centered between two empty shelves I would fill on my own time, with my own things. That evening, I walked to the park. The sky was bruising into twilight, gold and violet pressed together at the edges. The swings creaked in the distance, and the benches were mostly empty. I sat by the community garden, watching the tulips stretch taller than they had a week ago. On the fence nearby, another one of Ava's drawings flapped gently in the breeze. This one showed a woman watering flowers while a little girl stood nearby holding a heart in both hands. Underneath, in her messy handwriting, she gave us a house, but she kept the garden. I smiled. The house was gone. But the garden, what grew in others because of me, what bloomed in me because I finally let myself tend it, would stay. Always.